domain, space, a new area, financial connectivity and increasing interoperability, etc. Hydropower, again, strong element of our cooperation, which most recently has included handing over of the 720 megawatt Mangdechu hydroelectric power project to the Royal Government of Bhutan. You would all recall perhaps that His Majesty was last in Delhi during his transit visit in September 2022. At that time also he had a brief meeting with the Honorable Prime Minister. In terms of the program elements of His Majesty's ongoing visit, as I mentioned, His Majesty arrived yesterday afternoon. External Affairs Minister called on His Majesty in the evening yesterday and hosted a dinner in His Majesty's honor, which actually involved a good discussion and interaction with the key CEOs of some of the Indian companies. This morning His Majesty visited Rajghat to pay his tribute to Mahatma Gandhi, and thereafter His Majesty had a meeting with Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. The meeting was also followed by lunch hosted by the Honorable Prime Minister, and later this evening His Majesty will meet Rashtrapati Ji. The bilateral discussions between His Majesty and the Prime Minister, as would be expected, covered the entire gamut of India-Bhutan cooperation and also issues of respective national and mutual interest. Let me briefly share with you its key elements as also the outcomes that we would be working on here onwards following the discussions between His Majesty and the Prime Minister. First up, His Majesty briefed the Honorable Prime Minister on his significant transformation and reform initiative that Bhutan is currently undertaking. Prime Minister, on his part, reiterated India's continued and full support to the socio-economic development in Bhutan, based, of course, on the priorities of the Royal Government and in keeping with the transformation initiatives and reform process as per the vision of His Majesty. More specifically, there were 5 broad range discussion range issues. First was on economic and development partnership. This covered in turn many elements, which included cooperation for Bhutan's 13th 5-year plan, whose process is beginning from next year onwards. Support, including relevant financial support for the reform process in Bhutan. Support also for the institutional capacity building in Bhutan, and project-based development partnership, which is one of the key pillars of our development cooperation with Bhutan. Second bucket of issues was relating to trade, connectivity, and investment cooperation, which in turn included discussions on infrastructure connectivity, whether pertaining to integrated checkposts, rail connectivity, air connectivity, digital connectivity, people-to-people linkages, and of course the inland waterways, of which we have spoken in the past also. The third related element pertained to long-term and sustainable trade facilitation measures that India and Bhutan could take, which would link to the economic growth and prosperity of both economies. For, as I just hinted in the beginning, as part of new paradigms on energy cooperation, which would of course strengthen the existing frame and specifics of hydropower cooperation, but also carry forward our cooperation in this domain into non-hydro renewable space. And the last subsegment in the economic chapeau relating to new sectors, which, as I mentioned, space, startups, cooperation in the field of STEM education as part of the bilateral partnership. In this context, the recent launch of India-Bhutan satellite, which was jointly developed by the space engineers from both countries, was particularly appreciated. In terms of specific outcomes, which, as I said, we would be following up based on the discussions between His Majesty and the Honorable